I'm David Burge. I'm a research scientist at the Norman B. Leventhal Center for Advanced Urbanism at MIT, and I will be moderating today's panel. The seminar today is entitled The Resilience and Sustainability of Global Systems of Cities, an Urban Science Perspective. We have two presenters today, Celine Rosenblatt and Jose Lobo. Let me give a little bit of introduction to how the process today will happen. We'll have these two presentations, each will be about 10 minutes, and then the rest of the time will be reserved for questions. At the end of the presentations, I will kick things off with maybe one or two questions to our presenters. And in the meantime, you guys can be submitting questions either through the chat, and then when they're done with my initial questions, you can also raise your hand and we can call you. So you can either submit a question through the chat, but please, if you do that, give us your name and your affiliation, or you can obviously raise your hand. And we're going to just try to be patient with us. We're going to try to sort all this out since we're going to have a lot of people here. Unfortunately, closed captioning is not possible today due to technical limitations. And if you are posting about today's event on Twitter or LinkedIn, please use the hashtag Urban2021. And with that said, let me do some quick introductions to the speakers, and then I'll let them take it away. So Jose Lobo is Clinical Associate Professor in the School of Sustainability at Arizona State University. Dr. Lobo was trained in physics, applied mathematics, and urban economics. His research interests include urbanization across time and geographies, the role of settlements in cities and socioeconomic development, and theories of invention. Dr. Lobo has a longstanding association with the Santa Fe Institute and is a member of various transdisciplinary working groups studying the origins and drivers of urbanization. Dr. Lobo also collaborates with organizations representing the global urban poor and slum dwellers as they seek to be an integral part of data-driven urban planning. When Jose grows up, he would like to be a scuba diving instructor. I think that's definitely possible, Jose. And then our second presenter, Celine Rosenblatt, is Professor of Urban Geography at the University of Lausanne, Director of the Institute of Geography and Sustainability, and recently elected as Vice President of International Geographic Union. She's a member of the International Science Council Commission on Urban Health and Wellbeing, a system approach for 4 years, and member of Society of Complex Systems. She studies the evolution of power distributions inside and between cities that reshapes the world organization of central peripheral cities and the complexity of the global urban system. For several years, she has worked on the evolution of multi-level urban processes and dynamics in city system networks. To study these topics comparatively, she has built many databases on large European and worldwide cities and the networks they form. So with those introductions, I will pass it off to Jose Lobo.
Thank you, David. Good morning, good midday, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Jose Lobo. I send you greetings from Tempe, Arizona, from the School of Sustainability at Arizona State University. I decided to, just to get us started in a conversational mode, I will bypass the use of slides and just talk. What I'd like to do in my 10 minutes remarks is make you aware, if you're not already aware of, what I think is both a very exciting opportunity or situation that we find ourselves in urban science, but it's an opportunity that in order for it to be fulfilled will require that we very deliberately engage in a type of dialogue that admittedly does not often happen in academia. So what is this exciting opportunity in urban science? I think that this is a claim, but I think it's a claim that can be supported. We are now in a position to much better understand the urban past, by which I don't mean just the past 100 or 200 years. I mean actually the whole span of urbanization, which is a process that began about 7,000 years ago, and which will actually be completed in our lifetimes. It's by 2050, 2060, and hopefully most of us will be alive by then. This process by which most of humans are living in settlements will be complete. So we are able and have been able, as a result of advances in technology, advances in what type of data we can get about the past, and also as a result of collaborations by which historians and archaeologists and urban economists work together in a way that was not that common even a decade ago, we are much able, I said, we have a much better understanding of the urban past, of the origins of urbanization. And it's good to be reminded every so often that, I mean, when we look around and the world seems now so urban and so dominated by cities, that this is really a relatively small episode in the history of our species. You know, our species is about 260,000 years old. Urbanization represents about 7,000 years of that long history of ours. So that was a very dramatic transition. We are understanding that transition better. Why did we urbanize? What drove urbanization? What were the consequences of urbanization? But importantly for our discussion today, the role of urbanization is a driver of socioeconomic development. Now, it is a truism in the social sciences to say that the past matters. And I'm sure if we were to do a survey of participants today and we were to ask each other, do you think understanding the past matters for the present? I think most people would say yes. But in practice, if we now focus on the academic discipline of sustainability or urban sustainability science, what's actually striking is that there is often not a lot of references to the past. And in fact, if you were to look at some of the major calls from various research agencies internationally for the development of urban sustainability science, you would notice that there's really no reference to the past. Now you might say sustainability by its very nature and urban sustainability really is focused on the future. Hopefully a very different future. I think everybody again in this call, we are probably committed to what can we do so that urban living and urbanization is better than it is today and better serves the needs and interests of the poor, for example. So some might say it's about the future. What is it about the past? Well, one obvious remark to make is that just about the only real proof that we have that the future can be different than the present is that we do know that the present is very different from the past. So maybe that alone motivates that we ought to take advantage of our greater understanding of the history of urbanization and its drivers to think about two things. One, what is truly fundamental about urbanization? Yes, over the span of 7,000 years, lots of things have changed, particularly regarding technology. But we are identifying, as a result of studying the urban past, we are now able to identify surprisingly commonalities that cities and urban systems across time have had. That knowledge might then help us think, as we think about making urbanization different, or modifying it, or managing it, or changing it, whichever term you want. Well, it might help us to think about what can we do to make urbanization different, better, more just, more energy efficient. We understand what is fundamental about urbanization. What are the levers that we can actually change, and which ones we cannot? So that's the exciting research situation we find ourselves. And I can send you a reference. You can see in many of the journals devoted to cities and to sustainability, you see more and more articles about the urban past. So that is intellectually very exciting. And as I said, the result of truly multidisciplinary work and ability to tap into data sources that, again, even as recently as a decade ago, which is really not that far away, we didn't have access to. That's the exciting part. But here I think I want to now highlight the challenge. As we understand better the history of urbanization, as we understand better, for example, why is it that some cities or some urban systems lasted a long time? And by the way, it's not just about collapse. That's the topic of collapse or societal collapse for a variety of reasons, attracts lots of attention. I guess because of the drama involving collapse. But it's also important to notice that there are many cases of cities or urban systems that lasted for many, many more years so far than capitalism has. Okay? And even what are often presented as stories of collapse, for example, the Maya in southern Mexico and Central America, they're often taken to be the perfect example of a society that collapsed. But the urban system of Maya society lasted for 720 years, which from a certain perspective is much older than capitalism. I am not prepared to predict that modern capitalism will last 700 years. So there's this obvious question, what did the Maya do to preserve an urban system over 7 centuries? Is there something to be learned in that? Ancient Rome, which lasted 2,000 years. Urban systems in what today is India and China that lasted for centuries. And one thing that we do know is that part of that survival story was change and adaptation and learning. An urban system does not last for 700 years doing nothing. It has to respond. It has to adapt. Are there lessons there? Okay. Now, the challenge that I want to present is that in order for that insight that we're learning about the history of urbanization, the drivers of urbanization, if we're going to draw lessons, insights into the development of urban sustainability science, and insights that can help us make better decisions as we transition urbanization into a sustainable urbanization, we need to establish dialogues between academics that are doing that exciting research and the practitioners that are actually managing the transition to sustainable urban development. That is a dialogue that is at the moment not as intense as, in my opinion, it could be if there are going to be not just research insights, and we all get excited, well, some of us by research insights just because we're learning something new, but if our understanding of urbanization as a historical process is going to inform the science and practice of urban sustainability, we will have to be very deliberate about having dialogues with the stakeholders who are at the forefront of that transition. And in particular, I would want to emphasize, have a research dialogue between the academics that are learning about the urban past and practitioners, for example, slum dwellers organizations. Everybody understands that it's going to be the poor urban communities in cities that will be immediately the most affected as cities suffer the consequences of climate change. And there's a lot of discussion about what cities can do to adapt, what cities can do to ameliorate the negative effects that unfortunately many of us think that it's too late to avert them. So I would like to finish my presentation, emphasize that I think the great promise to truly turn our understanding of urban sustainability into a historically informed science that needs a dialogue that at the moment is not occurring. And I will want to urge all of us involved in urban science and in that study of urbanization in the past to be very deliberate in broadening who we talk to, in reaching out to work with the urban poor and representatives of the many urban communities that in many parts of the world are not benefiting from urbanization and who stand to suffer a lot of negative effects from the effects of climate change in cities. So the summary here is, I think there's great intellectual excitement. I think we are in a situation now where we can understand urbanization much better over the span of its whole history and across geographies. For that knowledge to be of use to the people who are going to be managing urban adaptation to climate change, I think, as I said, we academics will have to make it very important for us that we step outside of academia and bring our results to a conversation, not just tell people about our insights in academic conferences, but engage in true working collaborations with the urban poor and their organizations. And I think that the network that's hosting this talk could play a very important role in facilitating that type of exchange and interaction, bringing academics and practitioners together so we can together learn about the urban past. So I could shower you with lots of references to studies that have been published in the past few years and continue to be published. I could talk for many hours about the specific insights that we have learned, but that we can leave for another moment. And if you want more details, you can email me and I will happily send you those references. So that is my punchline for this morning. The past, we are learning a lot about the urban past. There are probably a lot of lessons in that research to manage the urban sustainability transition, but there will need to be a dialogue between academics and practitioners. That will not happen by accident. It will only happen if we seek that dialogue out. So I will stop there, and I hope that there will be a lot more. I hope there will be a lot of questions. I hope I have provoked questions in you about the claims that I have made. So I will stop here and turn it over to David and Celine.
Great, thanks, Jose. Yeah, very, very interesting insights from your current research, and we'll obviously ask you questions at the end here. So Celine, I will turn it over to you now, and then at the end we'll start to bring up questions for both of you.
Okay, so I will also present, let's say 10-15 minutes. Well, I will try to build, well, I will share my screen, and I asked to Laura to deal with the admission of the people, because people continue to come, and so I cannot present and manage the system at the same time. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation for the talk, and with Jose, it's really a pleasure, and with all the people of Toronto also, it's a pleasure. So I will go directly to the point. Well, we can start with a different definition to make what makes a city sustainable or resilient. And also we could ask whether the urban science could answer or not to different things. And I will argue in this presentation, very short presentation, how we would need a multi-level approach, a multi-dimensional approach, and I will give you some perspective, so very short presentation. So, in fact, to compare the two terms of sustainability and resilience, rather than putting the definition, we search with Michael Rogoff in the literature. We search in the more than 200 papers, what were the specificity of the co-occurrence in the sentence of resilience and sustainability. And we obtain a graph here where we put clusters with around different terms, so sustainability, resilience, but also cities, ecosystem here, governance, community. And what appears is that some words appear only with resilience, other only with sustainability, and other systems appear. So, for example, here systems, system approach, dynamic, stability, resistance for resilience, and for sustainability, community resilience, long-term, sustainability, natural hazard, or robustness. So we want to go deeper in this differentiation, and what we saw is that, of course, there is two different things: the adaptation in one hand for the resilience, and the more transformation for sustainability. And also what is the big difference between both? It is the short-term and long-term, which is quite opposed. So resilience is more so the resistance to a short-term, let's say, attack or crisis. And there are many commons as well. So in these short-term and long-term perspectives, and here we have different. Both are multi-domain. This is really very important. So ecology, economy, and society, the triangle of sustainability actually. And what is interesting is both are linked to adoption. So adoption and other things, but specifically adoption make me think about the transition. And transition is important because every transition you have a niche and you have a regime which is a larger system and a landscape which is more global. So both sustainability and resilience face different transition, and Jose before me spoke about transition, which is very important for long and short term. So also there, specifically for resilience approach, we cared about how the resilience evolve in how resilience happens in an evolving environment. So there is mostly an engineering resilience approach where there is the system come back to its previous and its initial stage. There is an ecological resilience approach with multiple equilibrium. And there is another approach, so to see that even the landscape, so what we saw before in the transition, the landscape and the regime, they can actually they can change, and so we are in an adaptive resilience. So adaptive resilience approach to cities and system of cities lead to think about the influence of a shock both to a city, so what we call, I will show you the meso level, and a system of city, which is very important. And there is a mutual influence between the two levels that we will see. So why we think that the system of cities is important. See here, for example, the evolution of the US cities, and you see that they evolved really in parallel. So they are in the same system, and there are many diffusion, interdependencies, cooperation, imitation, and so on, made by different networks and by the US system. So actually, there are some cycles that were introduced by Agerstrom, but Denis Pumin also for the evolutionary urban systems, that you have cycles and stage in these cycles. So stage of innovation, of commonplace, and mature or in innovation, a new innovation appear. So scaling law permit to see at which stage we are. I do not have time to explain more, but we can explain after. In these processes, national scales and states are very, very important. So they represent homogeneous space with level of development, with specific institutions, and they give access to many things, regulator, coordinator, and so on. And also international and transnational scales are evident, are very important, with different regional scales, with different kind of agreement, but also with historical colonial linkages. And we see it, for example, in this graph of intercity linkages of multinational firms. And we see that according to the different colors of the continent, the cities are more compact. And so you must know that 80% of all the linkages are intracontinental, and more than 2/3, more than 66% are intranational. So these scales still matter a lot. So I introduced my multi-level approach because there are microprocesses between different adjunct firms or individuals and so on. There are agglomerations of these behaviors at the local scale making the city, but these cities interact. And there are many top-down and bottom-up interactions that are very important and that make me introduce the panarchy approach for the resilience of the system. What is the panarchy? It is the hierarchical structure in which systems are interlinked in never-ending adaptive cycles. So an adaptive cycle is exploitation, conservation, release, reorganization, and so on. And we have the interaction between different levels of adaptive cycles, with small and fast to large and slow. And well, with time, I think that these levels can change, but we have always some, yes, this interaction making some revolt or some remember, so force of change or force of conservation to a certain system. And so we applied this framework, theoretical framework, on the Russian cities facing the economic crisis 2014-16, because there was a very big embargo, boycott, fall of all prices and so on. And so we took at the macro level the integration of cities in globalization as multinational firms, linkages and so on, and how evolved the city's socio-economic trajectory, so the evolution of the employment by activity. And we watched to the co-evolution of macro and meso level. So for this, we took, here you have two different dimensions, connectedness and potential. And so for connectedness, we took the tiredness, which is the linkage between different activities. So the way different activities are developing together in the city, and potential are specializations. So on that, we reproduce for the meso level and the macro level, so here the connectedness, the tightness, and here the potential, the specialization. And you see that during the period 2010-2019, the cities, they mostly go at the meso level from the left to the right. And the left is more resilient. So they go to relax in a way. They are more, so the activities are more linked together here also. But what happened in the different periods? If we take only the tightness, which is important here, in the period of crisis, you see that the link between the different activities of all the 40 largest cities increased, but in the period of the crisis, it decreased for all the city, and it increased again. So in this period of crisis, there is a relax of the link between activities to resist to the crisis, and then they relink again in another space and in another condition, and they moved a lot and they changed a lot. So this is very important. What we need, I think, is also to consider that there is not only cities in space, there are cities also in the space of activities. For example, different technologies emerge and are linked to each other and create some big sectors and develop and make this transition. So we need to study this multidimensional approach, and so put the same system as cities with economy and study them together. This is what I try to do. And with that, we see that we can, for example, use some cascading effect between different kind of networks. And we see specifically a very important result that similar interdependent networks are more robust than to random failure than randomly interdependent network. So this is a very nice result to see how also different activities or different domains could interact each other at the different levels of the things. So the future exploration, in order to better as José said, support the decision makers and the thing to the city is to explore how environmental issue affected the urban system, but also how all the other dimensions with their different levels, for example, technologies, but also employees, directly or indirectly via the firms and so on, they could affect the way the city developed. In fact, here we have all the aspects of the behavior of the people, but for this multi-level is important because, for example, here when we studied the creation of the United Nations Habitat, they took different dimensions. They took different kind of resilience, and despite that they try to make something multi-scale and multi-dimensional, their criteria remain very local and very unidimensional. So they lack of multi-dimensional vision, the lack of local global vision. And why we can think why they did not develop more the multi-level scale, multi-level and multi-scale and multi-dimensional approach. It is that this approach of habitat, which is very important because a lot of investment in many cities, they were led actually not by scientists, they were led by many private foundations, like 100 resilient cities, supported by Rockefeller Foundation, Bill Gates Foundations, Ford, World Bank, and so on. So here we showed with Daniela Marino how much these different actors actually support the interest of different other actors that they lead, like that and that. So we have some clusters and they lead different opinions when we apply a textual analysis of their discourses and so on. So the thing is that we must really develop more this multidimensionality, and so we need really to adopt a global and transversal approach with different levels to avoid the silo that we spoke when we met in Toronto 1 year and a half ago. For example, in Lausanne, we are creating now, and I will give you news soon, next summer and next fall, of the City Research Network. And so we build it with different themes, but transversal issues and again, transversal approach in order to avoid these silos. I think also that beside new urban science could help because we try to develop universal laws. Of course, these universal laws are adapted to the diversity of the society, and they are adapted to policies and to local knowledge and experiment. So it is not what is attacked in the literature actually as a universalism absolute. It is what we could call a lateral universalism, a mobile universalism, which is nourished by the diversity of local experiences. And also we must be careful about how technology should maintain the sustainability and resilience of the city, but also the freedom, the right, the privacy, and the ethics. So I think that we cannot let the cities to the city planning to engineers, but social and human science should participate actively. In particular, in the smart cities and city digital twin that are really actually discussed, there are interlayer processes that they do not actually catch a lot, and also many human and social processes. So it is not only physical city issue, but interacting people issue. And so can we use the city digital twin, for example, to use it to search desirable cities? So the urban science could show better what we know, what we don't know, with the, of course, always the danger in an excess of rationality, but also a danger to refuse every rationality, as we read in some text of postmodern something. So I think that there is a power in the knowledge we have, a power of domination, the domination, for example, of engineers, but also the domination of this data, and to make it at the service to better know and to imagine new ways for desirable cities. So thank you very much. These are some recent books, but this one will be published next summer, next July, and I will send you when it will be published. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Celine. Appreciate it. Wonderful presentation, and you as well, Jose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question, two questions, and each question is sort of coming out of one of your presentations. So what I'd like to do is I'll ask Jose a question, and then Celine, I'd like you to maybe respond, even though that question is not necessarily entirely tightly tied to your presentation, as a way to get you guys to kind of build a discourse and to maybe critique, friendly critique each other, or develop a dialogue. So I will actually, I'm going to copy and paste this into the chat, and then I'll read it out loud. And also, obviously, as as we're talking about these two questions, everyone, you guys can be thinking up your questions, and then we'll just launch right into audience questions. So I'm going to post this, and then I will read it, Jose. Okay. So it's a little bit long. So Jose, you mentioned, capitalism may not last very long in your presentation. 700 years, the Maya. Maybe capitalism doesn't even last that long. So towards that end, this question: do you feel that it is possible for the current form of capitalism, which measures success basically based on compounding growth rates? Our current form of capitalism, which sort of leads to an infinite growth mentality, which this has been brought up by maybe one. Obviously, not saying anything new here. But is it possible for that to exist alongside the parallel need, which we all are becoming very aware of this rapidly shrinking ecological budgets we have for carbon, water, raw materials, et cetera? So can these two kind of paradigms work together? So, put it differently, do you feel that technological transformations and system design improvements can continue to increase economic productivity while simultaneously solving these ecological crises, which are obviously many times the result of those economic processes? So are we just kicking the can down the road, or is there a way to actually raise above these fundamental problems with technological or system design? I guess the follow-up question to that, Jose, is, do you think if we can't do that, do we obviously need to practice some form of economic degrowth? So changing the logics and the measurement of success for market economies, so that we can, sort this out, and we don't have to continually be growing, and having infinite profit, kind of compounding growth rates. So does that make sense, Jose? And can you kind of give us your thoughts? And then Celine, after he talks, I'd like to hear what you think about this, even though it's obviously maybe not totally aligned with your work.
Well, first, I think that in a sense, David, I believe is one of the fundamental questions in not just in urban sustainability, but in sustainability in general. My most honest answer is, I don't know. But let me share with you very quickly an actual experience or conversation that many of us are having in the American Southwest that actually touches upon this, and which makes me serve as an example that what at first seemed like such a daunting idea, degrowth, maybe in practice, it's not so daunting. So I live in a part of the United States where there's a very widespread acknowledgement and recognition among scientists, citizens. One of the few things everybody agrees in the American Southwest is that we're running out of water. That the existing supplies of drinking water that we have, aquifers, lakes, reservoirs, snow melts, are not adequate to continue the pattern of growth over decades now of using water. And so in effect, we are having a conversation about what will it be like to live in Phoenix or Las Vegas or San Diego or Los Angeles and households not use as much water? And I think that's a relevant example to your question, David, because I think at the moment, over the decades, most people's attitude towards water has been, I use as much water as I want, just turn on the tap. It's just, and in fact, I sometimes even do this. I often ask my undergraduates when I first encounter them in a class, do they know how much water costs? And there are a variety of reasons that water has been so cheap in the American Southwest that most people don't even know what it costs. But we are discussing right now, what would that be like? And there is no one assumes that we cannot be prosperous, happy, lead good lives, but using less water than we're using now. And to me, maybe that's an example of like, wow, this sounds very radical, especially in the context of the United States, to start asking people to think about using less. But when it comes to water, we're going to have to. I mean, there's no choice. So my answer to your question is, I don't know, but there might be surprising indications that conversation can be had without it seeming like, wow, you're calling for a complete makeover of the social system. Because again, I want to emphasize, everyone in the American Southwest agrees we will have to use less water. For everyone to have access to water, by the way. That's, of course, that's also an assumption, very important. Everyone should have access to water, the water they need to survive and be healthy. Okay, if you assume that, we will have to decrease our consumption of water. Check back in 10 years whether we do it or not.
Well, sorry, Celine. Let me ask one quick follow-up, Jose. So, as you guys are modeling, the kind of water system and how you need to make it more efficient, and Danny asked this question about desalination. I think it's a good one. I think we know the technology is available. Yes, you can use reverse osmosis to even filter, private household water, right? You can remove most of the pathogens. I've done actually a little bit of research to this myself. But I guess the question is, when you guys are modeling this, are you actually going to model the whole metabolism of that? So, okay, you can reduce water use, but you need to have all of these materials, right? The reverse osmosis system or whatever that is. You need a lot of energy to push it, right? So it's like you can reduce water use, but then you have to increase material use and energy use in order to do that. So do you feel like, I know that, the answer obviously is that we don't really know. It's very contingent on histories and technologies that are available, when they become available. But do you feel like we're doing an adequate enough job modeling these interconnected relationships between material resources, the energetics, all of these things? Or is that just too complex a network to really model and simulate, to really predict? And are we just going to have to wait this out and just see what happens? Because sometimes that just happens, right? We can't model everything. It's sometimes impossible.
Well, I'll give you my opinion about that. And I want to emphasize, I don't want it to be seen as a criticism of the very daunting work a lot of my colleagues are doing. So there is a lot of modeling work that's going on at Arizona State University, University of Arizona, the University of California system. I am part of those efforts. And yes, it is very daunting, but my opinion is that we are getting better and better at modeling this very complex system of water use throughout the Southwest. What I don't think we are still good at is, as we build those models, building them with people, not just us, academics, mathematicians, but with the communities that will bear the brunt of the climate change here. Again, I don't want to, I know this sounds like a harsh criticism, and I'm part of criticizing myself as well. But again, it goes back to this theme that our technical capacities to model at this moment are far outpacing our ability or willingness or even our know-how to how do we do this modeling together with people besides ourselves. And now to the question of desalinization, that has been looked at, and that actually a variety of several technical and even jurisdictional reasons why desalinization is not very big part now of the future solutions. It's not that it has been ruled out, and we could talk for a long time about that. But your question, David, we're getting better at the modeling part. I think we need to get much better at the co-production part.
Okay, great. Okay, Celine, I'll let you jump in here.
Yes, just shortly to answer in my way. I think that now we have a lot of techniques to use less water, the desalinization, but also we have circular water. I think that really a very high percentage in Israel water is circular. So they reuse the same water, especially for agriculture, which is the most part of the use of water. And I think that all that are systems of engineers. It's a question of techniques, but we know that it is not only a question of techniques. It is a question, as Jose said, of institutions, jurisdictions, but also how the society adapt to this new technical change, because all the change and transitions are socio-technical. And this is, I think, the very important way, because did these new technology do this new, for example, informational capitalism we are living now, does it lead to more inequality or less inequality? It is a way we can share the technique. It is a way we can reorganize the society around these techniques. And I think that it is not a question only on the growth, but more on the adaptation and the reorganization of society, because there are so many differences and inequalities in our society that the growth in general is not, I think, really the question.
Okay, great, thanks. And Celine, so we're rapidly running out of time. I'm going to post a question, Celine, and just ask you. Oh, that's not working. So what I'm interested. It's too long. Hold on. Sorry. What I'm interested is, Celine, is hearing about the relationship of individual humans especially, within resilience work, because I've actually in the middle of writing a review paper of how resilience processes can become inequitable. And one of the key points of that, one of the key critiques of the haulings, the engineering, ecological kind of framings of resilience is that a lot of them almost require, or they allow for, the sacrifice of individual elements in order to maintain that high level functioning. If we think about, forest fires, predator-prey relations, engineering systems with intentional failure modes, right? One of the questions I have here is, in a social system, obviously we don't just let people die, right? I mean, COVID is one, I think, maybe the best example in recent history that, the United States and most other countries are sacrificing economic productivity and potentially a lot of other human well-being in order to save human lives, right? My question is really, do you feel like the political and ethical, moral aspects of human society are properly modeled in these kind of conceptualizations of resilience, such that those kind of boundaries that they produce on system functioning are real system functioning of cities and nations? Are we properly conceptualizing that? Or are we kind of trying to do sort of a both and, where we're taking functioning kind of conceptualizations from ecology that we don't actually allow to happen in real life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that, well, actually the modeling, it depends how you take the modeling approach. For example, that stopping the economy of cities, as it happens everywhere in the world, we could expect that they created a lot of poverty and it increased a lot the inequality. It is what happened, but it was different from a city to another one, from a country to another one, and this we could see it in advance, but also what we could see is that, for example, all the modeling that was made on the diffusion aspects. So to show also the counterintuitive relation that we could have. For example, the countries who decided to not make the lockdown. They said, okay, we can manage in another manner, but actually it was Sweden, for example, but they are in a very specific configuration of the country and cities, with a very low density, with a very high equality between people, you know, and so it can work in this context, but not in other contexts. But actually, at the end, it showed that it was not working so much. But I think that the question is that the modeling in different aspects could help to see, the counter effects, and also the how much the because when we speak about individuals, yes, it is always a problem for the individual to adapt in new circumstances and so on. But what helps individual to adapt? It is well, actually basic for the social science. It is a community, the membership or belonging and participation to different communities, and this is how the people adapt. So the question is also how these communities could be more inclusive and evolve in a right manner to help the people to adapt, and maybe that this could, well, in a way, not in totality. The principle of modeling is not to replicate the world. It's not to exactly to model like twin digital cities try to do. It is really to better understand some complex phenomena. So I don't know if I answered to your question.
I think the perspective is very interesting, yes. And these questions are, they're almost impossible to answer. I'm just throwing them out to drive the conversation. Jose, do you have a quick response, and then I'll open it up to the crowd?
Again, very good question. Let me just mention a reminder that I think even although we might uncover and we are discovering fundamental social processes that all urbanization experiences have in common, cities are also, as any aspect of society, about policies and about choices. So, for example, to me, one of the most exciting insights we're getting from studying urbanization in the past is that we're discovering that in the past, and I'm talking about thousands of years ago, there was a wide range of urban experiences regarding inequality. We know that there were urban systems in the past that, of course, within the technological constraints, were less unequal than the US urban system is today. I think what that is a reminder of is that urban inequality and poverty ultimately is a manifestation of choices and priorities. You can have societies that decide homelessness is intolerable. Just it's a decision. Then do something about it. I'm not saying it's easy. You might have societies or elites that say, we can live with it. What I can tell you is that the elite of Los Angeles today accepts a level of inequality that the elite of Teotihuacan, one of the greatest urban systems of Mesoamerica before the Spaniards didn't. It was much less unequal. So I think we cannot forget that. And this is also about notions of decency and what do we think is tolerable or not. But
thanks. Okay, well, I'm sorry to take up so much time. So if anyone wants to either raise their hand, or it might be easier actually to submit to the chat, because there's 4 pages of people. It's a little bit hard for me to find people. So if anyone wants to drop in a question, go ahead. Okay, so I'll read the question, and I'm gonna butcher this name. I'm sorry. Shrinagesh asked, the pandemic has exposed the Indian cities' vulnerability and the hollowness of infrastructure facilities. Is Indian cities' growth an economic bubble which can burst any time? What is your perspective?
well, let me just say, I'm not an expert on India society urbanization, although I have worked closely with Indian colleagues, and I actually do have a close relationship with the Indian Institute on Human Settlements. And I think what has been going on in India now is it's a very stark reminder that economic growth needs to be accompanied by decisions about what that growth is going to be used for. So many of us are in shock that democratic India that has been experiencing the growth that it has. Clearly, as you said, this is revealing that India, the Indian authorities have not invested over the years in the type of infrastructure that will have placed India in a better position to address the pandemic. And one can only hope that this experience, once India gets out of it, will perhaps motivate Indian urban planners, Indian policymakers, Indian citizens, Indian academics to think a little bit more creatively, what can urbanization be like in India? But I think this is an experience that tells us the way urbanization has unfolded. And by the way, India has not even yet crossed the threshold to have most of its people live in cities, is revealing the consequences of choices not made. But you will be able to make choices, hopefully, soon after you get out of the pandemic. So,
Celine, do you want to comment on that? Or there's another question, I think, right after for you, either way.
I think that actually what characterizes Indian cities is really huge inequalities. What we see, but also what characterizes India is the lack of infrastructures, hospitals and medical infrastructure, but they have the best industry of medicals of the world beside that, but they export everything. So you see that there is really a systemic problem of that, because they produce but they cannot use, and the infrastructure is not good. So really, as I said, the country level is so important for cities. There was a debate some years ago, maybe more than 15 years ago, between Mario Poles and Peter Taylor in different journals like Urban Studies and I think, well, I agree with Mario Poles, who said that the level of the country, there is an interaction between cities that reinforce countries, and the countries with all the laws, all the institutions and infrastructure, they really improve the conditions of everybody and of the democracy. So I think that cities are the center of these democracies, and they have also their bad side of what the structure is not. To answer to the question to Daniela, who put on the chat, she asked if the panarchy approach, the vision, the system should be evaluated bottom up or opposite. Actually both, but the problem is the interpretation. When you have a statistical relation, you have to deduce by theory, by also your logic, the relation between the two levels, but it is not done but by any model. This relation, the direction of the relation between different factors and so on. So the question is all in the interpretation, and this is why I think that the theoretical frameworks are very important, and not only, empirical and data and so on.
Okay, thanks. So we're coming to the end of the hour. I don't know, Jose and Celine, if you are able to stay a few minutes over, if there are other questions.
Yeah, I can stay. I can stay.
Okay, so what I'm going to say, I'm going to wrap it up, kind of formally wrap it up. But if people want to stay and ask more questions, we can maybe stay over 5 or 10 minutes. But just for everyone who has to leave now on the hour and have other meetings to go to, I just want to say thank you to our speakers and the audience for your participation. I apologize, maybe I took up too much time with my questions, but just as a kind of highlight for the next series. So the next seminar will be Governing Complex Urban Regions in the 21st Century. It will take place on Monday, June 14th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. Universal Coordinated Time. So for more details and to register, you can go to schoolofcities.com, and I'll just put that in the little, I think everyone probably knows that link already. I just put that posted that to the chat. Okay, so thanks for everyone who has to leave. We appreciate you guys participating and hope this has been a useful conversation. And for anyone who wants to stay after and has extra questions, please post them and I will. Okay, so we have one from Douglas to Celine. How can cities in Sub-Saharan Africa, which lacks most aspects of development, be modeled? So I think it's a modeling question, maybe lack of data question for modeling.
Yes, I never think specifically of Sub-Saharan African cities, but well, the way is that I saw many models made also with the population. The population, they bring their own knowledge, and I saw even more than 20 years ago, many researchers working with the population to make the model, the social model, because the culture also matters in this. So they know the relation between the thing, but they have in general a small piece of the story, and all together they can create the story. But actually, I think that the complex models are not complicated. They are complex, but they even a model with 4 factors, 3 or 4 factors can be complex. So.
Yeah, things multiply very quickly. Any other questions?
I think Paulo, I don't know if Paulo is still in the session, but I think Paulo Morgado put.
Oh, yes, yeah, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I think I think actually it's a very, very good question. Oh, excellent, Paulo. Thank you for staying. So I think that this is the task that we as researchers need to accomplish. We, as I said earlier, we have been learning for some time, but I would say in an accelerated fashion over the past 10, 15 years, we're learning about underlying fundamental social processes that do seem to be common to most cities and urbanization across time. But at the same time, if you want to know or understand a particular developmental path of a city, there, of course, details matter a lot. So here's sort of this interesting tension, because if you want to make theory or models in any of the sciences, you have to make decisions as to what is more fundamental and important, and you have to decide on what details you're going to ignore. But if you want to understand, well, let's say you want to think about, well, what's possible as an urban development path for Phoenix, say. There, you will have to really take into account Phoenix's history, Phoenix's geographic location. So I think your question, what it reminds us is of this balance and tension between theorizing and modeling and learning about a system, while when thinking about the specific choices, options that are available to any one city, there you need to understand in a lot of depth the details. And that's a balance that's not easy. And hopefully, as we train a new generation of urban science scholars, we will be training them to both want theory, but respect detail. And so that will be my answer to your question. I'd like to hear whether you find the answer compelling or you have, because I think that's a very important issue. So if you have comments about my answer, I would like to read them, so to speak.
Yeah, Paulo, if you're here, you're welcome to jump on.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, Paulo. It's just that I think your question, and this touches on what Celine was saying, that the role of a model is not to recreate reality in all of its details. That actually is not useful. It's overwhelming. It's to sort of highlight what do we think are the important drivers.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
I
Yes.
can.
Okay, so it's easier to speak up. So yeah, I totally agree. I would just want to hear your opinion about it, about how can we input the details so we can shape things more fitted to the specificity of each place. And
Now, where are you based, Paulo, by the way? I'm curious. Where are you now?
in Lisbon, in
Lisbon.
the
Yes.
yeah, the University of Lisbon.
In my point of view, I agree absolutely with what Jose said, that we make a lot of choice of what is important, what is not important. And what is the more difficult is to have the intuition, to see the what we call the wake signals of very small things, but we think that it will become important. It's not yet important, but it will become. And this is the most important difficulty, because all details are not so important. What is important, we know that a lot of details will not reproduce a good model, but what is important is to know what will give the main direction of the development of the city. And for example, you know that there are different trajectories and bifurcations. And the thing is that in a bifurcation, which direction will be taken? And so which factor really is heavy to lead the city to this direction or to this one? And there is a lot of imprevisibility, actually. And there is more imprevisibility than previsibility. And so I don't know what is important. I think that with modeling, we don't make prevision, but we make more prospective. Prospective, it's to explore which are the possible futures, which are not so linear. But we cannot say the city will go in this direction, you know?
Yes, yeah, I do agree. It's trying to understand how can we pinpoint in somehow the drivers so we can just see the trends and then explore and get proxies that are closer to the reality instead of, so we can, in the end, kind of, as Jose was saying in the beginning, try to come closer the academia and the decisions, for instance, the practitioners, but also the decision makers. And if the proxy is closer to the reality, then we probably be able to create more realistic scenarios of how the future can unfold. Just thinking about what the unpredictability and thinking about the perspective that you were saying, Céline.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I think at this point we do need to wrap up. I think all the hosts and everyone involved needs to start to move on to other meetings and things like that. But thank you, Jose and Celine, so much.
Thank you.
Extremely interesting.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. Everyone stay safe and healthy. Have good summers.
Yes, exactly. We agree with that. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.